Hello, you guys. Today we're going to be introducing IB Business Management. So this is done by IB Excellence Academy. So I'm going to actually be breaking down IB for you. So if you're starting IBDP, then welcome. I'm going to be explaining what the IB is and everything you actually need to know before beginning IB and breaking it down basically and helping you with everything. So let's begin. So this is like a really good and detailed guide for you. So I'm going to be talking about what IB is, the IB subjects, so your selections and how you choose your subjects, what's required of you, the grading system, how you're graded, the internal assessment. So this is part of what you're graded on IB, your oral assessments, HL versus SL, your extended essay, and TOK and CAS. So I'm going to be explaining every single part of this. So let's begin. So what is IB? So basically, IB is a recognized program by the world, by the entire world. It's an educational program designed to develop students with in-depth subject knowledge, critical thinking, and global awareness. Okay. So basically, IB is globally recognized, which is what makes it actually special. Because no matter where you are in the world, you're taking IB. So many countries take IB, because it's internationally recognized, and that means that um your grades are internationally understood. Um, so yeah. Students take 6 subjects from distinct categories. So we're going to be talking about that further in the next slide. They study TOK, Theory of Knowledge. They write an extended essay and they complete CAS. I'm going to be explaining all of these different requirements that you have. And also, it's offered at 2 levels, meaning that you can take your subject at either standard level or higher level. So higher level means that they cover more material and require deeper understanding. Again, I'm going to be explaining all of these further. And the key focus of IB is intellectual growth, emotional balance, and global mindedness. Okay, so let's continue. So now for the IB subjects. So like I said, you're required to take 6 subjects. And what are these like? So each subject comes from one group. So you have studies in language and literature, or studies in literature. So you can choose basically, but that's your first language. This is a language you have to know with your mother tongue basically. Then you have the second group, which is language acquisition, meaning that it's just a sort of lesser level. You do different things. I'm going to be explaining that as well. Individuals and societies, meaning humanities in other words, sciences, mathematics, and the arts. But if you don't want to take an art, you have the option of either taking 2 humanities or 2 sciences. So you have that option. Right, these are your options. That's what you can do. So now I'm going to be further breaking down the subjects apart. So firstly, you have studies in language and literature. So what you can do actually is that you can take two um, subjects in group one if you're bilingual, or trilingual, whatever you are. But basically, if you speak more than 2 languages or 2 languages, then you can take two of group one and no group two. That's what I did personally. I didn't do it out of choice, but I did it. So I have a bilingual diploma because what happens is that when you take 2 languages in group one. So you take 2 group 1, then you end up getting a bilingual diploma, right? It helps you stand out just a bit. I don't think universities really see it as something that helps you stand out if you're in UK, if you're an UK applicant. If you're US applicant, that might be different case. But if you're UK applicant, I don't think this will help you stand out much unless you're like a languages major, I guess. So I'm going to be explaining what group 1 is. Okay, so studies in language literature. You can either pick English literature or English language and literature. It doesn't have to be English, it can be Arabic. I took Arabic as well. I took English language and literature and Arabic language and literature. I took English at HL and Arabic at SL, so I can even explain the details much better for you for this. But basically, you can either take Italian, whether you live in Italy, you're Italian. You can take Portuguese if you live in Portugal or if you live in Brazil. You can take Hindi if you're wherever, if you know Indian. You can take Mandarin. So you can take any subject. IB has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of languages that you can take. But this is basically group 1 is for a language you know fluently, a language that you can read and write and express in, because what is required for you, because you have 2 papers, right? So basically, if you take it at standard level or take it at higher level, I'm gonna explain. Basically, at standard level, for your paper 1, so paper 1, what is paper 1? Paper 1, basically, they give you a passage, right? What they do is that they just give you a passage. It can, if you're taking language and literature, right? If you're taking language and literature, they give you a passage that can be an article, it can be a blog, it can be a magazine cover, it could be so many different things, right? It could be a speech. In language and literature, you can get so many different things. That's for paper one, and you have 1 hour and 15 minutes, right? But if you take literature, they're most likely to give you poems or plays, right? So language and literature are quite different, but they're both English at the end of the day, but they're quite different for what you do, because language and literature requires you to think more outside the box. Language and literature as well, it's for those who read less, because in literature they read more. So yeah, for paper two, it's a comparative essay on two texts studied in class. Okay, so basically paper two is based on where you get 4 questions, right? And these questions, like, they're just based on the books you read, right? But these 2 books, you have to compare and contrast them in your paper too. And these 2 books are generally chosen by your school. For HL, language and literature, just group one in general, is just a bit harder in the aspect of paper one, right? For the aspect of paper one, in paper one for the standard levels, you actually have to complete one test, because you have 2 options and you end up picking one option. For the HLs, you have to do 2 options no matter what. So you have to do both options that you're given, because they're actually no longer options. You have to solve both exams, right? So basically for English, I'm going to be explaining more, but basically you have 2 hours and 15 minutes. So that's less than double of the time, right? So you don't have 2 hours and a half, you have 2 hours and 15 minutes. So you have to have a faster pace. So it's not a more complex passage, because you do have the same passage, but it's just that you have a longer and more complex exam. But for your paper two, it's the same as I said. So basically, to sum up for um, group one, basically, if you want something that's graded on a harsher note, then you go for HL, because HL, basically, it's not much harder when it comes to the material, because HLSL, you study the same material, you study the same way. The harder part is that HL, you're just graded harsher. The grading for SL is for HL is much harsher. That's A. B, HL have to have better time management skills. And for example, for if you're an SL student, you'll be like, okay, I'm really good with speeches, I'm really good with articles, I'm really good with those things. I'm not good with the brochures, I'm not good with images, I'm not good with graphics, I'm not good with stuff that have images. So with as students, you have some sort of flexibility. You can run away to a certain extent, if there's something you don't like. With HL, you have to do everything. I think that English HL is something that, or it's not English HL it's specific, it's just language in HL. I wouldn't do it personally, because I think that you're just graded on a harsher note. So you can't really prepare much unless you're writing essays and writing essays and writing essays. And writing essays it takes quite time, especially when you're cramming for your exams and you have 2 weeks and you have over, like, I personally had 17 exams. So if you have 17 different exams and you have to write essays, I wouldn't recommend it. I did English HL. I didn't find it to be the most suitable. Also, finding HL teachers that can, finding teachers in general that can teach a group one can be quite difficult. It's not really that easy to grasp, and the skills you gain for languages, they're gained over the years. So since PYP or whatever program you've had, till now, these are the skills you've been building for language. Language skills don't come that easily. You can't just get a tutor and learn everything in 2 weeks. You need a lot of base and skill for that. So yeah. One more thing though, is that if you take a language at BHL and the language at ASL, you can still get a bilingual diploma. So basically, that's it for the group one, because I took one at HL, one at SL. The last thing I'm going to add is that you also have to do an oral assessment, which I'm going to be talking about later. So yeah. So now for language B, I didn't take a language B, but of course I know about language B because I've been very familiar with the IB system. I've been tutoring students. So basically, language B is for students with prior experience with the language. So they have some experience with the language. So for example, language B can be French, it could be Spanish, some take English, but the boundaries for English are quite high. A lot of students who take English at level language B generally know English really well. So basically, language B at SL, you have a writing task for 1 hour and 15 minutes. They basically give you prompts. And then paper two is listening with reading and comprehension, right? The listening is quite difficult. A lot of times they give you, it's very fast, so you can't hear it. A lot of times the audio is a bit unclear. It's a bit not ambiguous, but it's a bit unclear. For the HL students, you have a slightly more advanced writing task. So it's 1 hour and 30 minutes. And listening and comprehension is 2 hours. So basically, if you're an HL student, you generally like have just 15 minutes extra for each paper. And I'm gonna explain something from what I've seen at my school and what I've seen with students generally across the world, that when students are taking a language at BHL, right? Then what happens is that they usually really know the language really well. A lot of the times, the language they take at BHL and they end up taking English A and they take a language at BHL, they generally know the language really super well. So the boundaries for HL languages at level B are generally really high. So it's a bit difficult for you to get a 7. It's really difficult for you to get 7 in languages BHL because so many kids know these languages by heart, right? But for at SL it's quite easier. So for you, and then you also have an oral. It's a presentation and conversation. That's your oral for both SL and HL students. Now, there's also another option called ab initio. So basically, languages ab initio is basically for beginners. So you don't have to know anything about the language, right? It's pretty easy because I have many friends and many students as well. They've taken ab initio Spanish. They've never spoken Spanish in their life. They know nothing about Spanish, but they still ended up getting 7. It's quite easy. They have short and long writing tasks. It's a 1 hour and 45 minutes. Basically this year they had a prompt about a sibling taking your device, something around that note, and then you have a brief conversation in the oral. But I just want to sum this up is basically in groups 1 and 2, because they both have to do with language, but they're quite different, of course, is that when the difference between SL and HL really is that HL is really just requires you to know more. It's not about studying more, it's about what you know more, right? So if you're not that familiar with the language, if you're not that familiar with managing your time, then I wouldn't recommend you do that. So yeah, because for example, in IB English HL group 1, so A level, basically you end up having just approximately less than 45 minutes for each passage, or you have around like you have basically 2 hours and 15 minutes, right? So that's basically around 135 minutes. Okay, so 135 minutes, you basically have about 1 hour and a bit for each text, so it's quite less than the SL. So let's continue. So for individuals and societies, group 3, I personally took two subjects in group 3. It's my favorite. I love humanities. I'm a humanities person. I tutor everything in humanities. So examples of humanities are history and economics. But there's business management, there's psychology, there's philosophy, there's so many others. There's also ESS, which is considered both a group 4 and group 3. It's a humanities and a science. So if your person doesn't like sciences, you can take ESS and put it as your science, right? So basically, for group 3, basically, the thing is, if you take a group 3 at SL, you only have 2 exams. But if you take a group 3 at HL, you have 3 exams instead. So you have 1 extra paper if you take it HL, right? So HL students tackle advanced topics, including case studies or deeper thematic issues. Personally, I took economics HL. I found the paper 3 extremely hard. It's the reason I got a 6, not a 7, because I got 7s on my paper 1s and paper 2s. I got really good grades, but when it came to paper 3, it was really complex. The topics are super advanced for paper 3 in economics. Whereas business HL, for example, I took HL, but I aced my paper 3. Paper 3 was really easy for me. For English, I aced it. So it really has to do with the subject itself. In IB, you can't really, because subjects really have different difficulties, but it's not also about the difficulty of the subject, but it's really about what you know about the subject. It's about really how you study your skills, right? For example, some students are really good at writing and analyzing. They can take history. Some kids, they're more numerical. They can take economics. Some kids like me, they like humanities more. So business management is more of a thing for them, right? For example, a lot of students they get because basically getting a 7 in economics statistically is easier than getting one in business, because in IB business 7.4% only got a 7. In economics it was I think 14%, which is like kind of double. It's like double the percentage. But it really depends on what type of person you are, depends on what you like, how you study, what are your skills, what are you good at. Because if you're good at math, you're good at, really being logical, then economics is really yours. If you're someone that's really STEM based, then you really like economics. If you're someone who really likes case studies, then you really like psychology, for example. Okay. So the difference between HL and SL, like I said, HL just covers more detailed topics. For me, for example, I took business management at HL and economics at HL. My HLs were mostly humanities, but basically, at business level, at business HL, it wasn't much deeper the content, but at economics it was. So that's how it really works, right? So now for group 4. Group 4, we have sciences. So what are sciences? You have biology, physics, chemistry. You have stuff that are slightly less traditional, more unique. You have design technology. You have marine sciences. You also have ESS, like I previously mentioned. So you have some sorts of options. Personally, I would stick with the classical options like chemistry and biology, for example, physics as well. So basically, but this year, by the way, it was really, really hard to get 7 in biology. Only 5% got 7 in biology SL, for example. Biology SL is quite hard to get a 7 this year, it was. But generally speaking, biology SL is easier than physics SL, for example, but really depends on what type of person you are. So for your sciences, you're tested on 3 papers. Whether you're SL or you're HL, you have 3 papers. So for paper 1, you have multiple choice questions. For SL, there are 30 multiple choice questions. For HL, there are 40. That's why HL have um 1 hour. So they have 15 extra minutes for 10 questions. So for 10 additional questions. So let's say you just have a minute and a bit for each question. You have to think of it that way. I barely finished my paper 1. The paper 1s came really hard in 2024, May. But basically, for HL, they have quite harder papers just because the questions are more complex, they're deeper. Um, they have basically for example, I'm giving you an example as biology. Biology, as a SL student, you have 6 topics and 1 option. As a HL student, you have approximately 11 to 12 topics with 1 option. Okay, so it's quite more challenging. For paper 2, you have structured questions and longer response. So basically, for a biology student, it's like first, or actually for all types of sciences. So first, it's data based. You have like, for example, you're given a case. So section A, you're given a case, and you just have to, like, for example, they give you a graph. They'll ask you what's the correlation in the graph. You have to do certain really small calculations. You might have to like draw upon its squares. For example, in physics, you have to like do your calculations. You have to show your math, for example, right? In chemistry, the same thing. So it's basically in paper 2, you end up showing your work. That's why paper 2 is the longest paper. So for SL, it's 1 hour and 15 minutes. For HL, it's 2 hours and 15 minutes. There's a difference. There's a big difference. And then, for example, in biology, by the end, the last section, section B, you're asked 3 questions, which are worth 15 points of the paper. For SL, and that's out of 50. So the papers out of 50, you have 15 points on answering questions. It can be any questions in the entire syllabus. And then you have um 2 options. So you have 6 sets of questions. We have 2 sets of questions. Each have 3. You pick 1 set, basically. And for HL, it's quite the same. They just have more topics. They have more questions because, again, they covered more topics. Paper 3, the section A includes experimental skills and data analysis, quite similar. But for example, they ask you about uncertainty and whatnot. And section B covers the option topic because, again, for each science, you have 4 options and you pick 1 option. So for example, in physics, you have astrophysics, you have biotechnology, you have energy. And then for SL, it's 1 hour. For HL, it's 1 hour, 15 minutes. That's the only difference. But they're quite, for sciences, the difference is the content. So for group 3 and group 4, the thing in common is that if you're HL, you're just gonna have much harder material, right? depending on the subject, but you're gonna have some deeper material. That's it. So you're gonna delve deeper into the material. For group 3 and group 4. Group 4, you're gonna have the same exams, but you're just gonna like take more time if you're HL because you have more questions, so your exams are generally longer. For for paper one, for group 3, it's quite different. Basically, you just have one additional paper. For example, I'm gonna explain to you business and economics. For example, in business, paper 1 is common for SLHL. Paper 2 is quite different. Paper 3 is only for HL. But in economics, paper 1 is different. Okay, paper 2 is common, and paper 3 is only for HL. Okay, so it's kind of different for each subject. I'm telling you, like they're not identical, but holistically they're the same. Okay, they're just some small differences within the subject. And again, this has to do with your skills. It really does. So now for mathematics. So for mathematics, you have two types of math that the IB offer. You have Math AA, which is analysis and approaches, and Math AI, which is analysis and interpretation. So what is Math AA? What is Math AI? Because this is a very, very, very commonly asked question. So basically, mathematics AA focuses on theoretical math, calculus and abstract reasoning, meaning it's the math you do your whole life, right? They give you like equations. It's basically stuff you really have to you know your whole entire life. For example, because I did math AA, so I know it quite well. So basically, you have algebra. You have functions, you have trigonometry, you have calculus, you have statistics. So these are the 5 topics you have to cover in ASL, for example, right? It's stuff you've done your whole life, really. Math AI, for example, it's quite different. It focuses on real world applications of math. It's better suited, okay, so it's better suited for social science and humanities in the meaning that if you're gonna do something with finance, with economics, AI is better just because it uses the calculator. It uses tools that finance people that work in the like realm of finance would use. So I'm gonna explain paper 1 for AASL. So paper 1 for AASL is non-calculator. You're not allowed to use a calculator for paper 1 in AA. But in AI, keep in mind, in math AI, you always use your calculator. There's a calculator called the GDC. You have to learn how to use your GDC really, really, really well. It's a quite expensive calculator and it's quite difficult to use in the beginning, but you have to learn how to use it really well. In paper 2, your calculator is allowed and you have 1 hour and 30 minutes. Okay. Or the paper 2 is really, really hard, came really, really hard this year. And again, keep in mind that in math HL, you have much harder concepts, but the papers, they come pretty similar, but the HL just have pretty much some more questions. That's how it came this year. But in AI, sorry, I didn't try this, but AI, you always have your calculator no matter what. In HL, AA, you have non-calculator advanced questions for paper 1, you have 2 hours. Paper 2, you have calculator allowed questions, and for paper 3, you have advanced problem solving. It's like HL topics. But keep in mind, in AI, you always have your calculator, but again, it depends on your major. But for example, if you're a humanities major, if you're doing law, you're going to law school, you're going to art school, you don't want math, you can just do Math AISL. Math AISL is pretty easy. It's not hard to score a good grade on. It doesn't require much studying. Rather than AA is a bit tougher if you're a math SL student, but math AI is quite hard. HL. Math AI at HL is quite hard. Then you have your subjects, subject 6. So the arts. So you can take visual arts, music, theater, film. I think these subjects are quite subjective, so you have to really be careful. Oh yes, I'm gonna be talking about subjectivity and objectivity in a second. But basically, rather than exams, the assessment often involves creating portfolios, performing art pieces, or engaging in practical projects, right? So for example, because I didn't take an art, I had 17 exams. But for example, if I took an art, I would probably have 14 to 15 exams. I'd have some less exams. Um, so it really depends on what type of student you are, whether you're artistic or not, whether you like these things. If you're artistic, then definitely you should take an art. You'll focus more on your artwork and you don't have to do an exam. So you'll finish before exam season. So you'll have one less subject to go. But the problem with arts, in my opinion, but again, if you need the art, then take one, I guess. But the thing with arts is just because it's really subjective. It's the grades are really graded differently. Um, so just keep that in mind. A lot of students don't end up getting their university conditions just because they end up taking an art. Very subjective. So now I'm just gonna be talking a second about objectivity and and subjectivity. So what objective means is that a subject cannot be graded based on the examiner's thoughts. So basically, what happens with some subjects that there's a rubric, and they end up filling this rubric. But this rubric can be filled differently by different humans. It really depends, right? Sometimes this human finds that, oh, this category is right or this category is wrong. Let me explain. For example, English. You may write, because your paper one is out of 20 for SL, right? So if you write the paper one, there's a really, really good chance that some examiners may give you a 14 over on your paper one, and some examiners may give you a 16 on your paper one. That's a big difference, right? For example, myself, I told you I did Arabic language A, language and literature. I did end up regrading one of my papers, and they did end up lowering my paper one grade from a 12 to an 11, for example. And my paper two, they ended up hiring it by 4 points. So it's really quite different. Paper two is out of 30, right? They end up hiring mine out of 2 points, out on 4 points, sorry. So it really depends. So language A, again, that's why I'm telling you it's a quite subjective subject. So that's why I also recommend taking it as L because if you want to actually, if you have a university condition, then it's quite better. Language B is a bit less subjective just because it's basically just you're writing, you're answering, and they're grading based on a rubric. So it's quite easy, meaning the rubric is, for example, what in the listening, whether you check the box right, it's quite very direct tasks, okay? It's not opinionated. For example, group three. Group three has a very sort of, it does have objective subjectivity, but on a really small scale. For example, in economics, your paper one, right? Your paper one's an essay in economics, okay? So what happens is that sometimes an examiner may not like your essay as much. Okay, it really depends on the examiner. It really depends because it's graded on a rubric. So sometimes this examiner may think, oh, this idea is very well thought. Another one may not. Another one may not like the real example, life example used, because again, you have to really, there's so many requirements. But yeah, so it really depends. For example, paper three in business management HL, whoa, very objective, subjective, sorry, because you have a 17 marker question that asks you to create a whole plan. And this is just like an essay that's between 5 to 6 paragraphs, right? Depending on a plan that you create, right? So this is very subjective. Um, okay, it's really because there's like 6 marks on evaluation, 6 marks out of 17. Maybe the examiner doesn't like how you evaluate, right? So it's very subjective, objective. So in group three, you have it's like 70% objective, 30% subjective, okay? Group four sciences. Group four is probably one of, if not the least subjective. It's very objective, so it's pretty easy to get your marks in group four. Okay, pretty easy. So I do recommend taking a group four in HL, honestly. A group five is also pretty objective just because it's mathematics. And group six is very subjective. So group one and group six, they're very subjective. Group three and group four, they're four and group five are very objective. Group three and group two are quite in the middle, right? Okay, so I hope you understand what I'm saying, honestly. Now you have the grading system, very, very, very complicated grading system in IB. So you have the grading system. So each subject is graded from 1 to 7, meaning 7 is the highest possible score. So if you get a 7, it means you ace more than 80% of the material. Getting a 7 is really, really rare. Usually less than 10% of students get a 7 in a subject. So yeah. The IB diploma is awarded to students who achieve at least 24 points. So you need to have 24 points to actually pass the IB, but you don't only need 24 points. You also need to have no more than 2 grades at 3. So if you have 3 3s, then you're gonna fail your diploma. And you need 12 points in your HL subjects, okay? So total points. So students must accumulate at least 24 points across 6 subjects to pass their diploma. This includes 42 points. So basically, you have 42 points that are out of your subjects, but then you have 3 points for TOK and EE. If a student receives fewer than 12 points and in their HL or earns a 1 in any subject, then they cannot earn the diploma, as well as they need 9 points minimum in their SLs, right? So you must know this, okay? So these are the requirements to pass IB, meaning that if your HLs or biology, chemistry, and let's say business management, right? If you have a foreign business, a foreign biology, but a 3 in chemistry, that's going to be an 11 out of 12. So you do not get your diploma. If you don't do your CAS, then you do not get your diploma. If you have 23 out of 24 points, then you don't get your diploma. If you get 1 on any of your subjects, you do not get your diploma. If you're taking math AASL, if you're taking physics SL, and if you're taking English SL, you get a 3 and a 3 and a 2, so that's a total of 8. You don't get your diploma, okay? So now how grade boundaries work. So what are grade boundaries? Grade boundaries differ between subjects, meaning that, okay, so for example, the test is at, so basically after the IB does its whole entire math, I'm not going to explain the math because you don't really need to know that, but it's out of 100. Let's say between 80 to 100 is a 7. That's usually in English. This is the general English boundary. Between 66 and 79, that's a 6 out of 7. Between 53 and 66, that's a 5 out of 7. Okay, so depending where you are, that's the grade you get, right? So like we said, grade boundaries differ in subjects. So a 7 in mathematics HL might require between 70, so basically between the grade 74 to 80. So if you have above 74, you probably have a 7. But for example, for English A, you need more than 80. So it really depends. And the grade boundaries, how are they created? They're created based on the global performance, how people did, right? So for example, I'm gonna give you an example. Biology, HL, right? Or no, biology SL even, like just biology generally. This year, the paper ones were extremely difficult in all sciences generally. So for example, an 18 out of 30 in biology SL was considered a 7 out of 7. It really depends on the global performance, right? But usually in other years where the papers weren't as hard, where they were standard, then you would get a 24 out of 30 to have a 7. So you see 6 questions out of 30 is a big difference. But again, it really depends on the student's performance. Then you have TOK and EE grading. So TOK and E extended essays are graded on a scale between A to E. So A, B, C, D, E, basically. So A is the highest, E is the lowest. And the combination of these two scores provides up to 3 bonus points. So if you have AA, you have 3 points. If you have AB and if you have AB, then you get 3 points. I don't know why I wrote this wrong. BB, so if you get BB, then you get 2 points. I personally got BB. If you get BC, then you get 1 point. Okay, and if you end up getting 0 points in EE or TOK, you end up failing your diploma, right? But remember, AB is 3 points. Sorry, that's my mistake. So now you have the IA. So what is the IA? So IAs are basically assignments completed during the course, and they're between 20 to 30% of your grade. It depends. For group 3, the humanities, for example, econ, business, psychology, history, each subject requires an IA that applies theoretical knowledge to real-world context. For example, in economics, you had to write a commentary on an article where you analyze the economic issue based on economic concept like scarcity or whatnot. So, or such as the impact of taxation on consumer behavior, right? So if you're an HL student in group 3, then your IA counts for 20%. If you're an SL student for group 3, then it's 30% of your grade, the IA, right? Or for example, if you're a business management student, then you have to base really base it on a business and answer a question regarding a change a business made, which is like based on change or ethics or sustainability. Okay, so the 4 concepts of business. Whereas for sciences, it's quite different. The IA basically requires an experimental investigation, so you really have to go to a lab. Most of the time, it's in the lab. Not all the time, depending on your experiment, but I went to the lab for mine. Examples include designing a physics experiment to measure projectile motion, or conducting a chemistry lab to explore reaction rates under different conditions. So yeah, a lot of the time they do ask, you end up like you pick your question and it's like a reaction rate against a experimental conditions. For example, I experimented peas. I experimented like the germination rate of peas regarding caffeine. So how caffeine affects the growth rate of peas, the germination rate of peas. So that's like an example. So yeah, these are what you have to do for your IAs. So they're quite difficult to do, honestly. Like depends on the subject, but I found my group 4 one pretty hard to do. And for example, in IB Excellence Academy, we actually do end up helping you with your IAs. We can help you get sevens. All of our teachers got sevens in their IAs. They're really masterminding the IAs. Um, I got sevens on my humanities IAs. So yeah. So now for the oral assessment, the IO, that was if you have anxiety, that's gonna be a nightmare for you. But basically, for your oral assessment, you have the individual oral, which is the IO. You do it for both language A and language B. So for group one and group two, basically, it assesses the student's ability to engage critically with text or visual material that demonstrate their language skills in a spoken format. The IO conducted by the teacher is marked internally, but then it's graded by grades moderated by the IB. This is something very important as well. Usually the teacher grades your IAs and your IO, so it goes for both. But the IB end up checking the way your teacher is grading and can either higher or lower the grades, okay? So for language A, it's a 10-minute, so for language A, it's a 10-minute oral commentary, right? So basically, for language and literature, you analyze one literary and one non-literary text. I think that's the same for literature. Yes, it is. So it's linking them to a global issue. Okay, you link it to a global issue. Um, so global issues are many, many different things, right? It could be world hunger, for example. This is followed by discussion with the teacher. So basically, the teacher ends up like asking you a bunch of questions and you have to answer based on the questions are based on your oral. So it's out of 40 points. And it's based on like the understanding of the text, how well you know your text, how you analyze your text, and like your communication skills. It's based on so many other things, but these are the main core. So it's basically 10 minutes of you talking nonstop, and then you end up, and you can also help you with your IOs, you guys. Um, and we end up helping you out. We're helping you prepare it, and we can tell you how to prepare for it, how to anticipate your questions, how to answer your questions, how to make it interesting for your examiner to hear, right? So this is out of 40, and it's usually if you're SL, it's 30% of your grade. If you're HL, it's 20% of your grade. Okay. For language B, it's a bit different. So students discuss a visual stimulus for SL, but for HL, it's a bit harder. It's literary extract, and then engage in general conversation about the course themes. It's out of 30 points, and it assesses your fluency, your accuracy, your cultural understandings with three parts: presentation, follow-up discussion, and a broader conversation. Okay. These have to do with global issues. Then you have your EE. So your EE is a 4,000 word independent research project. It's really, really hard. But again, we can always help you with your EEs, especially your science EEs. We have a lot of great tutors for that. You can choose any topic within the IBDS subjects. So, for example, you have EE in history. So, an example is like the causes of Cuban Missile Crisis. You can do English. I personally did mine on Dorian Gray. I got a B. I was very close to an A, but it was quite nice. It was a really nice EE. Again, subjects like English, they're quite subjective. Um, Subjects like history may be subjective as well, just based on like the opinion of the grader. While science CEs are much better to get a good subject to get good grades in. Okay, we can really help you with all types of EEs. So yeah, but your science CEs, I can guarantee you guys will get better grades just because it's more objective and subjective. Your EE counts up to 3 points combined with TOK. But your E is it is graded out of 26 points, your E, right? And you know a lot of points of your on grading rubric is actually based on just your citations. It's because it's a research project. You'll work with a supervisor and submit drafts, but the final product is definitely of your own work. It helps develop university level research and writing skills. Again, it's a very, very advanced writing. Then you have TOK. So TOK makes students reflect on the nature of knowledge. Personally, I think that you're gonna like TOK based on your teacher in class. I actually really liked TOK when I had my DP1 teacher. My DP2 teacher, not so much actually. So it's really quite different depending on your circumstances, because I see a lot of kids, they don't like TOK, but I really like TOK, honestly. We can also help you with your TOK work. I'm going to be talking about what you're graded on TOK. But basically, um, you were graded on two things. You're graded on your 2K essay, which is 66% of your grade, about 67% of your grade. It's 1,600 words essays, and each year the IB give you six prescribed titles. So they give you six titles, and you pick one. So they give you basically six topics. You pick one topic, and you write your essay on your TOK essay on. But you also have your TOK exhibition. You select three real-world objects and explain how they illustrate knowledge concepts. Okay, your TOK essay it's graded by an IB examiner, anyone around the world, okay? It's very subjective. For example, my brother, who also did IB, had a really low predicted on his TOK essay, but he ended up getting an A by the IB, right? He had a C or D predicted, he got an A by the IB. Your TOK exhibition is graded by your teacher at school, but it then moderated by the IB, meaning that the IB sees um, 2 or 3 samples your teachers have graded, and they end up either hiring, lowering, or keeping the grades the same. My cohort had their grades stay the same. I really loved my exhibition. It was a beautiful one. And we can also help you with your exhibitions, you guys. We're really experienced with that. We've done it for plenty of students. So they ask you questions generally about questions like how do we know what we know, for example. That's a really basic one, but that's the kind of the sort of question they ask you. A TOK and EE together can earn up to 3 extra points for your IB diploma. Okay, so and I gave you the ratios. Now we have CAS. I personally hated CAS. I found it super annoying, but you guys have to do it or else you won't get your diploma. CAS encourages students to engage with their community and pursue personal goals. What does CAS stand for? CAS is an acronym for Creativity, Activity, Service. Creativity is like activity like music, art, or creative writing. I used to actually have my own channel before IB Excellence Academy. It was called Academia with Katie. I also tutored students back then. I was more focused on English literature. But basically that was my creativity back then. I also had some quite other activities, but that was my favorite one. Activities is, for example, physical activities like sports, hiking, or dancing. Personally, I did Pilates. Service is volunteering, social work, or environmental projects. And keep in mind that you always have to make sure that you're actually doing these things because you have to document them and show proof to your IB, and you have to download them on ManageBack, which is like a sort of um like website that you have to upload your stuff on. Then you have cast project. So it's a collaborative and meaningful project that lasts for at least a month. My project included helping single moms who don't have husbands to help them with their children. We help them actually start their own business. For example, organizing an art or organizing an art exhibition to raise awareness for a cause. So again, CAS is not graded, but it's a requirement for earning the IB diploma, meaning that there's no grade on CAS. It won't affect your grade, but again, if you don't do it at all, then you don't get an IB diploma. Then you have how to succeed in IB. The key to thriving in IB is effective time management. You won't survive if you don't manage your time. So plan ahead for your IA deadlines, class activities, and e drafts. Again, in IB Excellence Academy, what we end up doing is before you start IB is actually we plan your subjects together. We analyze and break down your skills. We see what you're good at. We also evaluate, we take into consideration what you want to do in your future, what you want to study at university, what courses you want to apply for, how competitive these courses are, what are the requirements for these courses, where you want to study, depending on the country, what the requirements are, how they see the IB, what subjects they want, the preferred subject of each university. So we see all of these things. Then we end up selecting these subjects and we do a 2-year planner for you. 2-year planner for you. We do your we design your own IA deadlines. We do your class activities. We pick them ahead of time. We see when you're going to do your e-drafts. If you need help with those, we assign our best tutors to help you do them. Tutors at Princeton, tutors at Russell Group University, so Ivy League's Russell Group. Our tutors are either in Ivy Leagues or Russell Groups. We develop strong study habits, balancing work between subjects, between your HLs and your SLs, because again, is a priority always. We use resources like past papers, online study guides, and seek feedback from your teachers. And you can also seek feedback from us if we're tutoring you. And the IBs may be challenging, but it will equip you with lifelong skills like research analysis and global mindedness. This is it, guys. If you want help with IB, if you're starting IB, then you can always reach out to me. If you want some advice, I'm willing to give you some advice, of course. If you want IB tutoring, if you want IB guidance as well, we're always open for that. If you want help with any of your IA work, your E work, you can always come to us. We always have our top-notch workers who scored 7s out of 7s. Personally, I have a 7 in IB Business Management. I can help you ace your IB Business Management IAs and your papers. I even have guides and notes on every single paper, and I can help you ace your papers. If you want free resources, then you can stick to our YouTube channel and subscribe and stick to our Google Classrooms, and we have the links down below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you become part of IB Excellence Academy. Bye bye, you guys. Good luck for IB.